Or are you recording yet? Sorry, Rachel. There we go.
There you go. Good to go now.
Hi, everyone. As Rachel said, I'm Mary Trotman. I'm the Operational Manager for the Children and Young Persons Neurodevelopmental Partnership. And I was just asked to run through our request to assess process and what to expect from an assessment. And obviously there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end. So I will get started. I hope everybody can see this. So we are the Children and Young Persons Neurodevelopmental Partnership. So what we're going to quickly talk about now for the next 20 minutes or so is an overview of our service. So requesting an assessment, like we talked about, the Children and Young Persons Neurodevelopmental Partnership and who we are, and what an assessment with our team actually looks like. So we'll start with developing the pre-assessment pathway. So the area that we were looking at is ensuring that the graduated response is a support tool. So it's a support tool for young people and families. So it's the expectation that an appropriate package of needs-based support will be put in before the referral is put through. The referral we term as a request for assessment. And there needs to be enough evidence that has been gathered that the young person is appropriately referred in, but also they are appropriately supported. So the pre-assessment pathway is supported by SENCOs in offering this support, requesting an assessment when appropriate. But the principle does also apply to other practitioners. So if other practitioners know the young person particularly well and they are able to completely assess the request for assessment, then that would be deemed appropriate too. When we talk about other professionals, sorry, I'll just go back to that slide. When we're talking about other practitioners, we're including phys workers, we're including specialist provisions, and we also include PFSAs or anybody else that's working with that young person. So there were some changes made to the pathways a couple of years ago, which I'm sure everyone's aware of, which is requesting an assessment, like we said, rather than a referral. The development of the implementation came from the development of the Neurodevelopmental, next steps form. There are separate sections within this, and that's what's really important, is that we have the separate sections for parents and carers, young people, and for the professional that is providing this request for assessment to us. Each section holds equal value, so this isn't a professional sending this in about a young person. This is about gathering information from everybody and the young person involved in the referral request for assessment. Apologies. We also have increasing requests that do come through school and other practitioners, and this minimises GP requests. The reason for this is that in a 5-minute GP appointment, it's very, very unlikely that they know the young person well enough and we can gather enough information. And so that's what's happened over the last couple of years. Those requests from GPs have become less and less. So what we do have is we have the support available. This is an advice and query line. This can be before sending in a request for assessment. This can be while waiting on the waiting list. And this can be contacted to discuss when it's appropriate to make a referral, but also can be offered support during during waiting for an assessment. So they'd also, the clinicians that cover and operate that phone line are also the people that would take the information about any expedition requests, but those do have to go to a larger MDT to be discussed. They can give advice on young people, practitioners and families. So we do have young people that phone that line themselves as well, and that can get really rich information. And we also can support SENCOs and schools on that helpline as well. So when we're looking at a referral, our referral criteria is quite clear and outlined. So what we have within that is that we have the age range that the young people would need to be part of. So young people referred into us need to be school age. What we also have is that young people need to be up to the age of college. What we tend to say at that point is we will look at who the most appropriate person to assess them once they are past the age of 17 and a half. And we work very closely with our adult services for that referral criteria. The next thing that we always look at is whether there's been a graduated response, which we've just talked about. The graduated response needs to be individualised and it needs to work for the young person. So we never say that everybody has to have had a set steps, a tick box exercise of making sure that every single section is ticked off. But what we do say is that there needs to be evidence that the school or other wider systems have put interventions in place, and that those interventions are working and are meeting the needs of the young people. We then have to see that there is evidence of social interaction and communication differences. So within peers, understanding others, non-verbal and verbal communications. We also like to see there's evidence of behaviours and interests differences. And we also like to look that there is very clear, compelling evidence that there isn't an alternative explanation for some of the challenges that the young person may be facing in that moment. Obviously, the other exception criteria then also comes into it. So they need to live in Somerset or have a GP in Somerset, or both live and attend school in Somerset. So obviously we do have provision there for our young people who maybe are boarders or are in alternative provision in Somerset. So who are we? So the Children and Young Person Neurodevelopmental Partnership, we're a large team. We're an MDT, so we have multidisciplinary practitioners within our service. We have 2 clinical leads and we have then clinical specialists within that. So we have a lead speech and language therapist and a lead nurse as well. We also within that have psychology, psychiatry, occupational therapy, like I said, speech and language therapists. We have paediatricians and clinical specialist nurses. And we also have assistant psychologists. We have a large administration team, quite a lot of which are fairly new. That team has particularly grown recently. So what does it look like? So the young person has been referred in, or a request for assessment has been made. They've met the criteria that we just discussed, and now they're coming through for their first appointment. So the way it looks is the first appointment is a video appointment, usually an hour, brief introductions and a background and contextual information is gathered. The second appointment is with 2 clinicians. And the third appointment, if should they need it, should the young person need it, would be consist of a number of specialists, so language assessments, cognitive assessments. So if I break that down a little bit more, the first appointment is for parents or carers, or the young person will receive a call to book their first and second appointment once they've reached the top of the list. Then the first clinical appointment for the young person assessment is with the parent or carers over Teams. These appointments are to collect a detailed developmental history, looking back from very early years, that young person, sometimes through to 17 years. So those appointments can consist of quite a lot of information. Obviously, the younger the young person, the less detail there is to gather. Further information is often requested from school at the end of this first video appointment. Further support can then be offered at this point in discussing the reasons for the assessment with the young person. So one of the criteria, obviously, is that the young person within the request for assessment has themselves filled out why they would want an assessment with us. And so part of the support that could be offered with the pre-assessment pathway and the telephone line, should it be needed from parents, is how to have that conversation with their young person, how to start discussing neurodiversity, how to start discussing that with their young person, which can be quite challenging conversations. Those conversations can be then further supported with the first telephone call before the young person has to meet face-to-face with one of us, because we accept that that can be quite challenging. But the second appointment is our initial face-to-face appointment. So our initial face-to-face appointments are carried out with 2 clinicians from different backgrounds. So it's either a speech and language therapist and a psychologist, or a nurse and an occupational therapist. So any mixture of professions within our team. An explanation is given to the young person, their parent carers of neurodiversity, and consent to continue is reconfirmed. So obviously we already have consent based on the next steps form. We reconfirm, having given our explanation of what we'll be looking into and what we'll be assessing for, and we reconfirm consent at this point and confirm that young people want to continue. The young persons and the parents, carers, are given the name of their key worker, so they know then who to contact throughout the process. And the clinicians then split, and the young person will remain with one clinician for the assessment, while the parent and carers complete further history taking with another. So for the follow-up appointments, while we always try to provide a clear explanation for the young person, our core role is to determine whether autism or ADHD is an appropriate explanation. We can offer additional specialist assessments, so we can look for cognitive assessment, language assessment, DCD assessment. We can do medical review and school observation. But the only times we will do this is when it's essential for the purposes of a differential or co-occurring diagnosis. So if we feel that there may be an alternative explanation, or we need to ensure that it's definitely a co-occurring condition, then we will then start to look into other avenues. However, if it's clear explanation that autism is the right answer, then we will get that answer without delving any further. This is to ensure that our young people aren't put through additional assessments and tests that aren't necessary and aren't causing them distress. We'll then gain evidence for a co-occurring area of need if this is integral to the formulation. So only if it's integral to what the family need to know, what parents need to know, what the young person needs to know about themselves, and also then what is suitably important for the recommendation in terms of what scaffolding and strategies may be additional to the ones that have already been put in place. So reports, our individualised recommendations are meaningful to the young person, and these will always be made. So we also say that our recommendations will need to be in response to concerns raised by the young person and family throughout the assessment. So the areas that we recommend are really focused on what we're hearing from families, what we're hearing from the young people. And they're also consistent within the formulation. So the formulation is the narrative and the story that we hear of the young person and the journey that they're going through in their neurodiversity. So that formulation, as we call it, which is the explanation for the diagnosis, is what comes through. Other people that have been to the presentation that we did last year will know that we've moved from just giving a diagnosis on a clinic letter to actually putting together a formulation in a report that's meaningful for that individual. And that's why we keep the recommendations consistent with that information. We also have regular updated recommendation bank, and these can be utilised. These can be utilised in our general recommendations and in all our reports, but many of them can be individualised as well. Many of these recommendations are also utilised in the helpline in the pre-assessment pathway that we talked about. So lots of these strategies, lots of these recommendations don't need to wait until this point. So the advice and guidance helpline is there and available, and we do have a big bank of resources that are available for young people to phone up and ask for, or families or SENCOs. So please don't wait until that stage.